They say the best trips change you, but some places don't just change who you are, they rewrite what you were. I've spent years chasing magic and mystery around the world, theme parks promising eternal joy, resorts offering peace beyond imagination. But some doors were never meant to open, some invitations should never be accepted, and some memories don't belong to you anymore. Tonight, I'll share 2 true horror stories from travelers who thought they were on vacation. One followed a trail of hidden symbols through the happiest place on earth. The other accepted a luxurious stay at a secluded mountain resort that never let them leave. Both stories are about places that smile too wide and about the terrifying cost of comfort that feels too perfect. So grab your passport, and whatever you do, don't stop smiling.
When I was 8 years old, Disney World was the most magical place I'd ever seen. The fireworks painting the sky in impossible colors, Mickey Mouse wrapping me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and dreams, the Pirates of the Caribbean boat ride where I truly believed, that I was sailing through real Caribbean waters. It all felt like living inside the most beautiful dream imaginable. So when I turned 28 and found myself spiraling into the darkest period of my life, fresh from a breakup that had gutted me, burned out from a marketing job that was slowly killing my soul, I booked a solo trip back to Orlando. I thought returning to that childhood magic would heal me. I thought I could recapture that innocent wonder, that pure joy I'd felt 2 decades ago. I was catastrophically wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with what I noticed first, because the details matter. They always matter more than you think. I arrived on a Tuesday in October, off-season, which meant smaller crowds, but also something else, something I couldn't quite name at first. The cast members' smiles seemed forced in a way that went beyond normal customer service fatigue. The recorded announcements had a slight distortion, like they were being played through speakers that had been underwater, and the guests, even the children, moved through the park with a kind of mechanical precision that felt rehearsed. From the moment I stepped onto Main Street, USA, breathing in that signature Disney smell of vanilla and ozone, I felt it. That something was fundamentally off. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing you could point to and say that's wrong. The music still played from hidden speakers, kids still squealed with delight on the rides, and the cast members maintained that legendary Disney cheer. But behind the manufactured happiness, there was something colder, something that felt like it was watching, like the park itself was smiling too wide. I spent the first day trying to ignore the feeling, telling myself it was just my depression talking. Mental health issues can make everything seem sinister, right? I rode Space Mountain 3 times, got a Dole Whip, took selfies with Goofy, normal tourist stuff, but that gnawing sensation in my chest wouldn't go away. That's when I started noticing the symbols. The first one I spotted was on the side of a trash can outside Space Mountain. It looked like a subtle swirl carved into the metal, almost like a hidden Mickey, but not quite. More organic, more alive. It reminded me of an eye, or maybe a spiral shell, but there was something unsettling about its proportions. The curves seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I thought it was just a scratch at first, maintenance damage. But then I saw another one on the base of a lamppost in Tomorrowland, identical. Then another on the door to a maintenance closet near the Haunted Mansion. Each one was etched carefully, almost reverently, like someone had spent hours perfecting the design. I started photographing them obsessively. I know how that sounds, but you have to understand, I was grasping for anything that felt real in a place that suddenly seemed like an elaborate facade. These symbols were the only authentic things I could find in the entire park. By the end of the day, I'd documented 17 of them, different locations, different surfaces, but always the same precise design. I showed the photos to a cast member near the Carousel of Progress, a young guy in a neatly pressed white shirt whose name tag read Jake. He looked at my phone screen for maybe 2 seconds before his Disney smile faltered. For just a split second, I saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine fear. He glanced around quickly, then leaned in close and whispered, "Don't follow the symbols. They trick you into thinking you're exploring, but you're really just following a path someone else designed, like mice in a maze." Then he straightened up, his smile snapping back into place like a mask, and walked away like nothing had happened. Naturally, I followed the symbols. I spent that night in my hotel room at the Grand Floridian, reviewing all the photos on my phone. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The symbols weren't random at all. When I plotted their locations on a park map, they formed a clear path, a trail that wound through all 4 parks in a specific sequence, leading from the most public areas to increasingly hidden corners. Someone wanted me to follow this path. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating a breadcrumb trail through the most surveilled theme park on Earth. But why? And who? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that symbol rotating slowly, like a hypnotist's wheel. Around 3 a.m., I heard children laughing in the hallway outside my room. But when I looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. The laughter continued for another 20 minutes. I came back to the Magic Kingdom the next morning at rope drop, but this time I had a mission. No rides, no snacks, no distractions, just the map in my head and an obsession growing in my chest like a tumor. I followed the symbol trail with scientific precision. Each marking led to the next, creating a route that took me behind buildings, into narrow alleyways between attractions, through maintenance areas that guests aren't supposed to access. The deeper I went, the fewer people I saw. The manufactured Disney magic began to peel away like old paint, revealing something older and stranger underneath. After 3 hours of following the trail, I found myself in a service corridor behind the haunted mansion. The symbols had led me to what looked like a solid wall, but when I ran my hands along the surface, I found it, a door painted to perfectly match the wall beside it. You'd never know it was there unless you were looking for it, but the symbol was fresh on its frame, still warm to the touch. I glanced around. The corridor was empty, no cast members, no security cameras visible. I tried the handle. It opened. The hallway beyond was narrow and sterile, white walls, humming fluorescent lights, industrial carpeting that muffled my footsteps. It felt like stepping backstage at a theater, but wrong. There were no pipes, no tools, no cast members rushing between locations, just silence and the constant electrical hum of the lights. I walked for what felt like 20 minutes, turning corners, descending ramps that seemed to spiral downward into the earth. I tried to mark my path, dropping coins at turns, noting distinctive scuff marks on the walls, but the route didn't make sense. According to my mental map, I should have been underneath the Seven Dwarfs mine train, but the distance I'd walked suggested I was somewhere near Frontierland, or maybe outside the park entirely. My phone had no signal. My watch had stopped ticking at 11:47 a.m. Eventually, the hallway opened into a cavernous room that felt like a forgotten exhibit. Dusty murals covered the walls, depicting Disney characters I didn't recognize, early concept art maybe, or abandoned designs. The art style was subtly wrong, like someone had tried to recreate Disney magic but had never quite understood what made it work. Animatronics sat motionless on pedestals throughout the room. Not the polished modern figures you see in current attractions, but older models with more primitive mechanisms. Their faces were frozen in expressions that might have been smiles but looked more like grimaces. As I walked past one of them, a 1950s-style housewife robot in a floral apron, it suddenly blinked. I jumped back, heart hammering. The figure's head slowly turned toward me with a mechanical grinding sound, its glass eyes focused on mine, and its mouth opened in that terrible almost smile. "Progress is eternal," it whispered in a voice like rustling leaves, "but some progress leads backward." Then it slumped over again, lifeless. I ran. I found another hallway, this one darker and narrower. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It reeked of mildew and machine oil and something else, something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. As I turned a corner, I nearly screamed. There was a little girl standing there, facing the wall. She was maybe 7 years old, wearing a vintage Mickey Mouse dress that looked like it belonged in a 1950s catalog. Her hair was in perfect ringlets, and she stood absolutely still. I approached slowly. "Hey, are you okay? Are you lost?" She turned around with mechanical precision, like a music box ballerina. Her eyes were completely white, not blind, but blank, like painted porcelain. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of a child's voice, a crackling recording emerged. It was Walt Disney's voice, but distorted through decades of magnetic tape decay. Walt believed in dreams. Dreams are doors, but not all doors should be opened. Some dreams are meant to stay closed. The recording looped, growing more distorted with each repetition. I backed away, and the little girl's head tracked my movement with unsettling precision. Her mouth kept moving, but the sound was becoming pure static. I turned and ran, finding myself in what appeared to be a theater. Red velvet seats covered in dust, an ornate proscenium arch, and a movie screen that flickered with old footage. But this wasn't any Disney theater, I recognized. The architecture was too old, too European, like something from the 1920s. A reel began playing on the screen, grainy, silent footage of guests enjoying the park. But there was something wrong with the film. The guests moved normally at first, smiling and waving at the camera, but then they began to look confused. They'd stop mid-gesture, glance around with growing panic, then look directly at the camera lens with expressions of pure terror. One by one, they vanished from frame, not walked away, vanished, erased. The last frame was a freeze frame of me from earlier that day, standing by the trash can where I'd first seen the symbol. I screamed. The walls of the theater rumbled in response, as if the building itself was alive. The movie screen split open like a curtain, revealing a passage beyond. I had no choice but to go through. I stepped through and found myself on what looked like the old Carousel of Progress stage. But it was wrong, decayed, like it had been abandoned for decades. The animatronics moved in jerky, glitching motions, their recorded dialogue playing backward or at the wrong speed. The smell of electrical fire filled the air. And in the center of the stage, watching me, was a man. He was tall and thin, wearing a perfectly pressed suit and tie that looked like it belonged in the 1960s. But his face was smooth, featureless, not blank, but unfinished, like a sculpture that had never been completed. He turned to me with fluid grace and spoke in Walt Disney's voice. "You can stay, you know. We'll keep you perfect. No pain, no aging, no reality, just story, just magic that never ends." He held out his hand, and I saw that his palm contained a contract written in flowing script. "Sign your name, join the family, be happy forever." I shook my head, backing away. "Number, this isn't real, this isn't right." His smile faded, and for a moment I saw something terrible in that blank face. "Then run," he said, and his voice was no longer Walt's, it was something older, hungrier. "Run, and see how far you get." The animatronics on stage suddenly jerked to life with violent, spastic movements. The music warped and reversed, becoming a cacophony of mechanical screaming. I ran. Every hallway became a maze. Every turn led to another identical corridor. I passed ride facades that I recognized. Pirates of the Caribbean, It's a Small World, The Haunted Mansion. But they were all wrong. The guests inside were frozen in looped animation, laughing without sound, pointing at nothing, their faces locked in expressions of artificial joy. I burst through a door and found myself inside It's a Small World, but the usual cheerful chaos was replaced by something far more sinister. The dolls all turned in perfect unison as I entered, their painted smiles stretching wider than their faces should have allowed. "We see you," they sang in harmony, but their voices were deeper than they should have been. We know your name, we know your fears, we know why you came. The boat ride continued around me, but now I could see the mechanisms. The dolls weren't just animatronics, they were people. Guests who had been transformed, their skin painted porcelain white, their eyes replaced with glass. They moved with mechanical precision, but I could see consciousness trapped behind their painted faces. One of them, a doll dressed as a little Dutch girl, mouthed the word "help" as she spun past me. I climbed over the ride boats, stumbled through a back panel, and crawled through a maintenance tunnel that felt like it went on forever. The walls were covered with those same symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. I could hear something following me, not footsteps, but a mechanical clicking, like gears turning. The tunnel finally spat me out into daylight, right back in Fantasyland. I was covered in dust and oil, my clothes torn, my hands bleeding from crawling through the tunnel, but nobody noticed. The other guests walked past me like I was invisible, their faces locked in those same artificial smiles. I ran for the exit, but the park seemed to stretch longer with each step. Main Street USA extended impossibly far ahead of me, like a funhouse mirror effect. Other guests moved in slow motion, their conversations becoming unintelligible murmurs. When I finally made it to the parking lot, I discovered something that made my blood freeze. My rental car was exactly where I'd left it, but the interior was different. The seats were a different color. The radio presets were set to stations that didn't exist, and hanging from the rearview mirror was a small Mickey Mouse ornament that I'd never seen before. I drove back to my hotel in a daze, checking my mirrors constantly. The road seemed familiar but wrong, like someone had rebuilt it from memory rather than blueprints. Back in my room, I immediately checked my phone. All my photos were gone. Every single shot of the symbols, the doors, the hallways, erased. But there was one new file I didn't recognize, a video. I hit play with trembling fingers. The footage was grainy, shot from a high angle like security camera footage. It showed me walking through the park, following the symbol trail, but I wasn't holding my phone. I wasn't taking pictures. I was just walking with purpose, like I knew exactly where I was going. And in the background of every shot, barely visible, was that tall man in the suit, always watching, always following. The video ended with a close-up of my hotel room door. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 5 minutes ago. That night, I heard a knock at the door. I didn't answer. I pretended to sleep, but I could hear something on the other side. Not footsteps, but that same mechanical clicking I'd heard in the tunnel. Through the crack under the door, I saw shadows moving, multiple figures standing perfectly still. A child's voice whispered through the crack, "Don't forget to smile. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. The magic never ends." I checked out before sunrise, driving hours without stopping, but the symbol was still there, carved into the palm of my hand like a brand. And worse, it was now etched into the glass of my rearview mirror, appearing and disappearing like frost on a window. When I stopped for gas 3 states away, a little girl waved at me from the edge of the parking lot. She was wearing the same vintage Mickey Mouse dress I'd seen in the tunnels. She pointed at my hand, then slowly drew the same symbol in the air, her finger leaving a trail of light. I blinked, and she was gone, but the symbol remained, hanging in the air like an afterimage. I'm not sure I ever really left Disney World. I'm not sure I ever will. Every mirror I look into shows that symbol. Every child I see has those same blank, painted eyes. Every song on the radio sounds like It's a Small World played at the wrong speed. And sometimes, late at night, I hear Walt Disney's voice whispering from my phone, even when it's turned off. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. I think I'm still walking through those tunnels. I think I'm still following the symbols. And I think, eventually, they'll lead me back to where I started. Back to the place where dreams never die. Back to the smile that never ends.
I've been a travel blogger for 6 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of tourist trap, every fake hidden gem, every manufactured experience designed to separate travelers from their money. But the invitation that arrived at my apartment 3 weeks ago was different. It was handwritten on cream-colored paper that felt expensive, addressed to me by name, with details about my blog that no marketing company should have known. "Dear Marcus," it read, "we've been following your work documenting unusual accommodations. We believe you'd be particularly interested in the Ravenshollow Resort, an all-inclusive experience unlike any other. 7 days, 6 nights. Complimentary. We only ask that you document your stay truthfully." There was no company logo, no return address, no website, just coordinates that led to a location in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. The paper had a watermark I couldn't quite make out, something that looked like intertwined letters, but the more I stared at it, the more it seemed to shift and change. I should have thrown it away. I should have recognized the red flags. But I'd been in a creative slump for months, rehashing the same boutique hotels and Airbnb experiences. This felt like the kind of authentic mystery that could revitalize my career. The drive to Ravenshollow took 7 hours through increasingly remote mountain roads. My GPS lost signal about an hour before I arrived, but somehow I never took a wrong turn. The road seemed to pull me forward, each curve revealing itself just as I needed to see it. The trees grew denser as I climbed higher, their branches forming a canopy so thick that midday felt like twilight. When I finally saw the resort, my breath caught in my throat. It was magnificent. A sprawling Victorian mansion that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside. Gothic spires twisted toward the sky, and wraparound verandas created intricate patterns of light and shadow. It looked like something from a fairy tale, but the kind where the princess doesn't get rescued. The parking area was nearly empty. Just 3 other cars, all of them covered in dust, like they'd been there for weeks. I grabbed my camera equipment and walked toward the main entrance, noting details for my blog. The architecture was flawless, the landscaping immaculate. But there was something about the silence that felt wrong. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees, just the crunch of gravel under my feet. The front door opened before I could knock. A woman stood there, tall and elegant, wearing a burgundy dress that looked like it belonged in the 1920s. Her hair was perfectly styled in finger waves, and her makeup was applied with museum-quality precision. She smiled, but the expression never reached her eyes. "Marcus Chen," she said, and her voice had a slight accent I couldn't place. "We've been expecting you. I'm Mrs. Aldrich, the resort manager. Welcome to Ravenshollow." She led me through a lobby that took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across polished marble floors. Oriental rugs that probably cost more than my car created islands of warmth in the vast space. Oil paintings in gilded frames depicted pastoral scenes that seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. "You're our only new guest this week," Mrs. Aldrich explained as we walked. "We prefer to maintain an intimate atmosphere, quality over quantity, you understand." I saw the other guests as we passed through the main sitting room. They were arranged in perfect tableau. A middle-aged couple playing chess by the fireplace, an elderly man reading a leather-bound book, a young woman in a white dress staring out a window. They all looked up as we passed, smiled politely, then returned to their activities with mechanical precision. Something about their movements bothered me, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Mrs. Aldrich led me to the 3rd floor, down a hallway lined with doors that had no numbers, only symbols carved into the wood. She stopped at one marked with what looked like a stylized eye. "Your room," she said, handing me an old-fashioned skeleton key. "Dinner is served at 8 sharp. We dress for dinner here. I trust you brought appropriate attire?" I had, actually. Something about the invitation had suggested formality. "Excellent. One small request. We ask that our guests refrain from photographing other visitors. Privacy is paramount at Ravenshollow. The architecture, the grounds, the common areas are all fair game for your documentation. But please be respectful of our other guests' desire for anonymity." She glided away before I could respond, leaving me alone in the hallway. I tried my key in the lock, and the door opened to reveal a room that was somehow both luxurious and unsettling. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in heavy crimson curtains. Antique furniture filled every corner, and oil paintings covered the walls. All portraits of people I didn't recognize, but who seemed to be watching me with 2 knowing eyes. The bathroom was equally opulent, with a claw-foot tub and fixtures that looked like they were made of real gold. But when I turned on the faucet, the water that came out was rust-colored and smelled like iron. I let it run for several minutes, but it never cleared. I spent the afternoon exploring the resort and documenting what I could. The place was incredible, a perfectly preserved time capsule of Victorian luxury. But the more I photographed, the more details I noticed that didn't add up. The dust patterns on antique furniture were too perfect, like they'd been applied by hand. The books in the library were all first editions, but when I opened one, the pages were blank. The grandfather clock in the lobby showed the correct time, but I never heard it chime. And the other guests, they were always in the same positions. The chess-playing couple made the same moves every time I passed. The elderly man never turned a page. The young woman never moved from her window. At 8 o'clock, I made my way to the dining room. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a table that could seat 30 people. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. But only 5 places were set, 1 for me, and 4 for the other guests I'd seen earlier. They were already seated when I arrived, and they all looked up simultaneously as I entered. Their smiles were identical. "Marcus," said the middle-aged man from the chess game. "How wonderful to have a new face at our table. I'm Dr. Hamilton, and this is my wife, Patricia. We've been here for... Oh, how long has it been, dear?" Patricia tilted her head, considering. Time moves differently here. Days blend together in the most pleasant way. The elderly man nodded. "Indeed, I'm Professor Blackwood. I came here to work on my memoir, but I find I'm never quite ready to leave. The atmosphere is so conducive to reflection." The young woman said nothing, just smiled and stared at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. The meal was extraordinary, course after course of perfectly prepared food that tasted like nothing I'd ever experienced. But I noticed that while everyone made the motions of eating, their plates never seemed to empty. They cut their meat with precise movements, raised forks to their lips, chewed thoughtfully, but the food remained untouched. The conversation was equally strange. They asked me about my blog, my travels, my life, but their questions felt rehearsed. When I answered, they nodded at appropriate intervals, but I got the sense they weren't really listening. They were performing the act of listening. After dinner, Dr. Hamilton suggested we retire to the game room for brandy. The room was filled with vintage entertainment, a billiards table, card tables, even an old gramophone playing jazz from the 1920s. But when I tried to examine the gramophone more closely, I discovered it wasn't connected to anything. The music was coming from nowhere. "Beautiful evening," Professor Blackwood commented, gesturing toward the window. But when I looked outside, I saw only darkness so complete it seemed solid. No stars, no moon, no hint of the landscape I'd driven through that afternoon. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue from the drive. Mrs. Aldrich appeared as if summoned to escort me back to my room. "I hope you found your first evening pleasant," she said as we walked. "Tomorrow we'll show you some of our more exclusive amenities. Ravenshollow has been welcoming discerning guests for over a century. We've perfected the art of hospitality." That night I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the resort. But instead of the normal noises you'd expect, settling wood, distant conversations, footsteps in hallways, I heard something else. A rhythmic tapping, like someone typing on an old typewriter. It came from the walls, from above and below, surrounding me. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I could almost make out words, but they were in a language I didn't recognize. I must have dozed off, because I woke to find sunlight streaming through my window. But when I looked at my phone, it was still 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd last checked before falling asleep. I got dressed and went to the window. The view showed the same magnificent mountain landscape I'd seen when I arrived, but something was wrong with the perspective. The trees were too tall, the distances too vast. It was like looking at a painting of a landscape rather than an actual landscape. Breakfast was served in a sun-drenched conservatory filled with plants that seemed too vibrant to be real. The same 4 guests were there, sitting in the same positions, having what sounded like the same conversation they'd had the night before. "Time moves differently here," Patricia said, as if continuing a thought. "Days blend together in the most pleasant way." I decided to explore the grounds. Mrs. Aldrich provided me with a map hand-drawn on parchment, showing hiking trails, gardens, and what she called points of interest. But as I walked, I realized the map was wrong. Paths led to different destinations than indicated. The rose garden was supposed to be north of the main building, but I found it to the south. The hiking trail marked as easy led to a cliff face that seemed to drop into nothingness. And everywhere I went, I found signs of previous guests. A camera left on a bench, its memory card missing. A journal tucked under a bush, its pages filled with entries that grew increasingly frantic before stopping mid-sentence. A suitcase half buried in leaves, containing clothes that looked like they were from different decades. I tried to photograph these items, but every image came out wrong. The camera would focus on something in the background, or the lighting would be completely off, or the objects would appear differently than I remembered seeing them. By the 3rd day, I was starting to understand that something was fundamentally wrong with Ravenshollow. The other guests never left the resort. They never received phone calls or mail. They never seemed to sleep or change clothes. They were like living mannequins, performing the same activities in endless loops. I confronted Mrs. Aldrich about it during my daily check-in meeting. "I'm concerned about the other guests," I said. "They seem unwell, disconnected." She smiled that cold smile. "Our guests find great peace here. They're free from the anxieties of the outside world. No deadlines, no responsibilities, no difficult decisions. Just comfort and routine." "But they're not really living," I insisted. "They're just existing. Isn't that what we all want, ultimately? To exist without struggle? To be cared for completely?" That night I decided to investigate. I waited until after midnight, then crept out of my room. The hallway was lit by candles that hadn't been there during the day, and the shadows they cast seemed to move independently of their flames. I made my way to the room next to mine, marked with a symbol that looked like intertwined snakes. I pressed my ear to the door and heard that same rhythmic tapping I'd been hearing in the walls. But now I could make out what it was. Someone typing, frantically, desperately. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Inside, I found Professor Blackwood sitting at an antique desk, typing on a vintage typewriter. But his movements were wrong. Too fast, too precise, like a machine. His fingers flew across the keys without pause, and the sound was deafening in the small room. I approached slowly and looked at the paper in the typewriter. It was covered with the same sentence, repeated thousands of times. I must document my stay truthfully. I must document my stay truthfully. I must document my stay truthfully. Professor, I whispered. He turned to look at me and I screamed. His face was still human, but his eyes were gone, replaced by empty sockets that seemed to stare through me. His mouth moved, but no sound came out except the clicking of typewriter keys. I ran from the room and checked the others. Dr. Hamilton and Patricia were in their room, playing that same chess game. But when I looked closely, I saw that their pieces weren't moving on the board. They were moving their hands through empty air, phantom pieces in a phantom game. The young woman was in her room, staring out the window at that impossible view. But when I looked at her reflection in the glass, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Her reflection was typing, just like Professor Blackwood, her fingers moving frantically across an invisible keyboard. I ran back to my room and grabbed my phone. No signal, of course, but I started recording a video diary, documenting everything I'd seen. But when I played it back, the audio was wrong. Instead of my voice, I heard the sound of typing, that same rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The next morning, Mrs. Aldrich was waiting for me in the dining room with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "I understand you had a difficult night," she said. "Adjustment can be challenging, but I think you'll find that acceptance brings great peace." "What is this place?" I demanded. "What's wrong with the other guests?" She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Ravenshollow is a place where stories are preserved, Marcus. Every guest who comes here brings a story, their experiences, their knowledge, their unique perspective. We simply collect those stories, keep them safe, make sure they're never lost. You're stealing their minds. We're preserving them. Every thought, every memory, every experience they've ever had. They live on here, in perfect comfort, while their stories become part of our collection. It's a kind of immortality." I stood up, backing toward the door. "I'm leaving. Right now." She smiled sadly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, the invitation you received wasn't just a request for documentation. It was a contract. By accepting our hospitality, by staying here, by beginning to document your experience, you've already agreed to our terms." I ran for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The windows were sealed. I tried to break the glass, but it was impossibly thick. I was trapped. "Don't struggle," Mrs. Aldrich called after me. "It only makes the transition more difficult. Soon you'll understand the peace that comes with letting go, the relief of not having to make decisions, not having to worry about the future." I ran to my room and began frantically packing, but when I opened my suitcase, it was empty. All my clothes, my equipment, my personal items, gone, as if I'd never brought them at all. I checked my phone. The photos I'd taken were disappearing, one by one. The video diary I'd recorded was corrupting itself, the sound of typing growing louder with each passing second. And then I realized the horrible truth. I was already changing. My thoughts were becoming sluggish, repetitive. I found myself walking to the window and staring at that impossible view for hours without realizing it. My hands kept moving, as if typing on an invisible keyboard. I'm recording this now, while I still can, while I still remember who I was before I came here. But I can feel my memories fading, being replaced by the routine of the resort. Soon I'll be like the others, a living record of a life that used to be lived, preserved forever in the amber of Ravenshollow's eternal hospitality. The typing is getting louder. It's coming from inside my head now. I can feel my thoughts being transcribed, cataloged, filed away. My story is becoming part of their collection. If you're listening to this, if you find this recording somehow, don't come looking for me. Don't try to find Ravenshollow. Don't accept any invitations written on cream-colored paper. The stories they preserve aren't worth the price they extract. I can hear Mrs. Aldrich outside my door now, her voice gentle and patient. "Marcus, dear, it's time for dinner. The other guests are waiting. And the terrible thing is, I want to go. I want to take my place at that table, to smile that same empty smile, to play my part in their endless performance. The struggle is becoming too much. The peace they offer is starting to look like mercy." I'm putting down the phone now. I'm walking to the door. I'm accepting my role as one of the guests who never check out. But first, I have to document this truthfully. I have to type it all down, every detail, every moment. I have to add my story to their collection. The typing is all I can hear now. The beautiful rhythmic sound of stories being preserved forever. Welcome to Ravenshollow, where every guest has a story to tell, and where every story finds its final chapter